What isn't a name? In some places, they're iconic for a number of reasons. For important historical events that happen, for an aspect of a significant cultural or societal importance that is synonymous with it, and the very mention of that name will actually bring a claim to fame straight to the forefront of the minds of anyone who hears it. Sadly, the opposite is also true. There are places that have been the site of tragedies or disasters that have been so significant that they became the main thought that springs to mind when the name is heard. Columbine, Aurora, Hiroshima, and sometimes an event so tragic and deadly that it can occur that it's really fundamentally going to cause the laws of that country to change. Today, we are looking into what became known as the Dunblane Massacre and finding out exactly what happened that day and the effects that it had since the time that it has passed. Dunblane is a small town located in Scotland in the UK. It's about 6 miles from Stirling and to the northwest of the capital, Edinburgh. Located around the same distance from the country's largest city, Glasgow, it has a population of around 10,000 people. When it comes to famous residents, you don't really need to be an avid fan of tennis to have heard of Andy Murray. With 3 Grand Slam wins under his belt and a knighthood to boot, he is arguably one of the most well-known and successful Scottish sportsmen alongside his brother Jamie. As for the town itself, some may know it for its scenic beauty or for its historical cathedral built in the 12th century. But the reality is that most people know of it because of the events that happened on the 13th of March in 1996. And this is as fair a place as any to put a bit of a disclaimer. For any that aren't familiar with today's topics, it's going to involve the retelling of a mass killing which claimed the lives of multiple, unfortunately, children. The descriptions will not be gory or unnecessarily detailed, but the subject matter can be a little distasteful to some. And if that applies to you, it's not a problem. Consider one of the other true crime videos in the sidebar, or even something more mystery or cryptid related. After all of that is on the channel, because now we're headed back into 1996 and finding out exactly what happened that fateful day. Very briefly, and since there is a general misunderstanding that all guns are illegal in the UK, or that there's just few and far between, here is a very rough overview of the actual legal status of gun ownership in the country up until the date that we've been looking at. While they may not be as readily available to citizens without any checks or licenses as they are in other countries, there have always historically been regulations that controlled who could have them and in which way they could really be obtained, used, and stored. One of the first controls came about in 1920, and this was going to come under the name of a Firearms Act, which tightened regulations and outlawed private ownership of automatic weapons, as well as introducing the need for firearms certificate. This would be updated in 1968 to require a certificate for all firearms. There was an amendment made in 1988 following the Hungerford Massacre of 1987, a topic we will briefly cover under similar cases, and one that might need its own video to fully cover. This made the ownership of semi-automatic weapons illegal for civilians and limited specific types of shotguns. The next amendment would be made in 1997. Our topic for today happens in 1996, and it would be as a direct reaction to it. Thomas Watt Hamilton was born on the 10th of May to parents in Glasgow. After his father left their family, he would end up being adopted by his mother's parents and raised in Stirling, which was not far from Dunblane. He was brought up to believe that his grandparents were his birth parents and that his mother was in fact his sister. When he eventually was told the truth in his early 20s, it seemed to have a profound impact on his mental health, one that stayed with him and led to him becoming increasingly angry as he grew older. He had a lifelong fascination with firearms and owned many of them, but his general behavior and temperament had led to a number of issues in his life. He was known to display erratic behavior at times, and to enough of an extent that one of the local shooting clubs refused him membership just outright. 2 of their existing members were familiar with him and suggested that he actually not be allowed to join. This was despite the fact that he legally owned 6 firearms, which is the legal maximum at that time, and had a keen interest in them. He had also been a leader in the Scouts, but was fired from his position after allegations emerged that he had been behaving inappropriately towards some of the boys that were under his watch. As well as taking photographs of some of the younger boys when they were not fully dressed, his overall demeanor and behavior was considered highly suspect. When he was officially let go, the reason stated was that they were suspicious of his moral intention towards the boys, and this would mean that he would be barred from rejoining the organization for life. life. He later tried to become a leader again in another location, but the news of his blacklisting had reached there and he was subsequently blocked. Hamilton would claim that these accusations, which he denied alongside others of a similar nature that had been made when he was a leader of a other youth club around the same age, had led to a widespread persecution against him. He claimed that this was the cause of his kitchen fitting business failing and considered himself to be unfairly targeted by all around him. Not good when someone starts displaying symptoms of paranoia of essentially everybody around me is against me. That's, ooh, God. So those who knew of him nicknamed him Spock, and he was considered definitely odd by most and predatory or dangerous by others. The police had interacted with him on a number of occasions over the years when following up on the accusations that had been made by concerned parents, and on at least one occasion for assault, and during the course of these, they questioned why he had the need for 6 guns that he legally owned. Despite these apparent concerns, nothing was done to limit his access to those firearms. And none of these accusations, which first emerged when he was only 22, were ever really considered strong enough to stand up in court. This did very little to quash the rumors that followed him for the rest of his life, however, and nothing to dampen down the growing feeling of bitterness and resentment that was growing inside of him. He would write out extensive letters where he aired all of his grievances, all the false accusations that he had felt had been unfairly laid at his feet, and all the people that he felt had done him wrong, and then sent them to a number of people. These included the parents that had accused him, some major papers at the time, even the Queen and the council officers. His efforts to run a boys' club associated with the local school was met with opposition. It was allowed and then banned under a complaint, and then allowed to continue again, strangely enough. All through it, his anger and his frustration at what he considered to be entirely false and exaggerated rumors. And it did seem as though most of the rumors were nothing more concrete than hearsay and whispers. It would later emerge that there had been at least one serious, concrete allegation made against him in a different area, but no one else was really willing to make any accusations that would stand up in court. Most of the unease was around his general demeanor. The fact that he was considered fairly odd and seemed so hell-bent on being involved in running youth clubs for young boys. Many believed he simply wanted to give them a good start in life. Others were more wary of his motives. His reaction to these accusations was usually in the form of letters that he sent to the offending parties, but he had also been known to appear on the doorstep of local council members and politicians that he felt had wronged him or really supported the accusations against him. Again, he always stopped somewhere just shy of criminality, but it did little to help his image, and he was developing quite an image in the local community. The fact that he had on at least one occasion brought a tape recorder with him secretly to record audio of his confrontation with a counselor that he believed had wronged him later led some to believe that he may have been trying to kind of goad someone into making an official allegation so that he could sue them for slander. Dunblane Primary School had a total attendance of around 700 pupils at this time, encompassing the entire primary school age for Scotland at that current era. This meant that there were children in attendance that were aged anywhere from as young as 5 to upwards of 12. On the 13th of March, 1996, Thomas Hamilton left his home in Stirling at 8:15 in the morning and then headed for the school. He would cut the telephone lines where he arrived at that school, ensuring that they would be unable to call the police as he entered the school with more than 700 rounds of ammunition and 4 handguns, all of which he did own, so, I mean, it just is what it is. At that time, a class of 28 pupils were about to start the physical education class, accompanied by 3 teachers at around 9:30 in the morning. This was Primary 1 class, the first year in the Scottish education system, and most of the pupils were about 5 years old. Thomas Hamilton entered the gymnasium and then opened fire on everyone inside. One teacher ended up succumbing to their wounds almost instantly from multiple gunshots, and the other 2 were shot several times but managed to escape, each taking some of the children with them. He shot almost 50 times within the gym, wounding multiple pupils and taking the lives of 16 in total. This description of exactly how the shooting went down is deliberately vague and general. We're not going to talk about it too much because it's horrific, but this is in no way meant to downplay the horror of what occurred. It's just when you get more into the specifics of exactly how, when, and with how many bullets he took, basically 16 kids at this point were taken out, but it's not really relevant to what happened. This guy was just a total jackass. After the carnage was over, Thomas Hamilton then shot and took himself out. He had taken the lives of 16 pupils and 1 teacher, as well as his own. There was a total of 32 people who suffered gunshot wounds, and the first call for help went out shortly before 9:45. The headmaster had made his way to see what the reports of the noise and commotion were, and when he realized what was going on, he ran back and got the deputy headmistress to contact the authorities at 9:43. Ambulance would then begin to arrive on the scene from just about 10 a.m., and resources were scrambled from all available nearby sources to tend to the wounded. In the wake of the tragedy, there was obviously pain and grief on a level that was hard to convey. And amongst the expected emotions, there was also a very real and pressing need for everyone to ensure that something like this would never be able to happen again. At that time of the incident, every one of the weapons owned by Thomas Hamilton, again, was entirely legal, and calls were made for the laws surrounding them to be altered. An amendment was brought in a year after the fact, known as the Firearms Amendment No. 2 Act in 1997, which made it much more difficult for ordinary citizens to possess and legally own handguns. This amendment called into question the necessity for the most private citizens owning handguns, and while it made some exceptions, largely it resulted in an overwhelming majority of handguns being handed in and destroyed. It also tightened the legislation when it came to ownership, storage, and licensing of firearms in general. An inquiry was launched into the background of the tragedy to try to see if there could have been anything done that might have prevented it. One aspect of the report that angered many was that large parts of the inquiry were sealed initially and not to be published to the public for up to 100 years. This was said to be in order to protect the victims that had lost their lives, but led to furious parents and residents campaigning against it, worried that there was some sort of cover-up afoot. The limitation was reviewed, and while the first 4 files, which were mainly personnel files of the victims and their details and evidence of their injuries, would remain sealed, the rest of the reports would be released to the public. When the rest of the report was issued, one politician stated this: "I hope the publication of this information will bring closure to many of the conspiracy theories surrounding the Dunblane inquiry and will reassure many of the individuals affected by the incident. The inquiry would also make several recommendations that were designed to improve security and vetting when it came to the control of people that were allowed in and around schools." The inquiry was also conducted by Lord Cullen, the same man who carried out the inquiry into the aftermath of the Piper Alpha offshore disaster and the Ladbroke Grove rail crash, with all 3 of them being in the wake of national tragedies and each bringing in sweeping reforms and changes. Sadly, we do live in a world where it is not difficult to find other events that have occurred at that point in the past that share hallmarks of the Dunblane Massacre, events where school-aged children unfortunately have been shot and killed in mass attacks. And given the understandably sensitive nature of that topic, these similar cases will be explained with a very brief overview, purely as examples of where else this has happened and without commentary or comparison between countries, perpetrators, or gratuitous explanations. For instance, the Columbine shooting is arguably one of the most well-known school shooting tragedies occurring in America in 1999. 13 pupils would lose their lives, and that at the hands of 2 gunmen who planned their attack and then opened fire on their classmates before taking their own lives after a brief standoff with authorities. With 23 people injured and 15 deaths at that time, it was carried out by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, and understandably, it drew a lot of attention to the topic within the United States. Many of the tactics and strategies that now are sadly commonplace in the US were actually brought about as a reaction to this shooting. One final victim, injured at the time, lost their life in 2025 after being paralyzed in the shooting. Since this was a direct result of their injuries and they were included in the death toll, it is a direct line to that. Another tragedy that also occurred was in Europe, where the actions of Anders Breivik in Norway caused him to plan and then launch an attack that targeted primary school children on an island named Utøya and a lake named Tierfjorden of the northwest of Oslo. On the 22nd of July, 2011, he detonated what would essentially be a bomb, like a homemade one anyways, in Oslo, which claimed 8 lives. While emergency services were responding to this, he made his way to the island heavily armed and then attacked a summer camp that was taking place for young people. In a spree lasting of around an hour, he would actually take nearly 70 lives, most of which were the teenage attendees and their supervising adults. He was eventually arrested and his manifesto discovered, which described his far-right views and the fact that his attack had been planned for years at this point. He would be sentenced to life imprisonment, a sentence that he is currently still serving as the time of writing. I mean, why even keep him alive at that point? Just take him into the woods and show him something. Another spree killing that occurred in the UK that bears some similarities to what has happened in Dunblane that day was what became also known as the Hungerford Massacre. This was when a 25-year-old by the name of Michael Ryan went on a rampage in a small town of Hungerford, taking the lives of multiple people as well as then his own. Again, this was carried out using weaponry that was legally held, and the motives behind the event are still really not fully understood. This too led to another increase in the number number of people who were asking for reform or reconsideration of the current gun laws in the UK at that time. So with a few to like tighten legislation and make it harder for civilians to own firearms without tighter checks or more restrictions, as well as they needed better assessment out of the necessity, like why you need to own it, I guess is what they would think in the UK. So this would result in the 1988 Firearms Amendment and the last one before the 1997 amendment that came after Dunblane. Critics would be quick to point out that someone could be forgiven for thinking that the UK only alters or tightens its laws when it comes in the face of abject tragedy. And while we could sadly fill this video's length with over like a lot of it, again with just brief descriptions of sprees and school shootings, we'll kind of wrap it up here with some very brief mentions of specific events for anyone looking to kind of research it for themselves a little further. Obviously, Port Arthur in Australia, Sandy Hook in the US, and Parkland shootings, they're all similar events with similar tragic outcomes. So I think we're just going to conclude that sad story of the Dunblane Massacre here. It was an act of brutality and cruelty that rocked not only the local community, but the rest of the country. And anytime this stuff happens, it's pretty shocking in the entire world. Like, it's one of those things that it's very primal with humans, that if you go after the young, it does something to the human brain. People, it's way worse. So in the years that have passed since there has been memorials erected, documentaries filmed, families interviewed, and investigations carried out, and while there is a lot that could be said in the aftermath of such heinous crimes, this is really not the time for me to jump on a soapbox and give you opinions on that. There are some pertinent facts that do bear emphasizing though. The UK as a whole saw that devastation that was wrought by one unhinged man that was heavily armed and moved almost immediately to restrict and tighten the laws of the land when it came to gun ownership. In fact, to this day in the UK, it is extremely difficult to gain a gun license to own a handgun legitimately. There are a few circumstances when it is permitted, usually those who are involved in the illegal hunting of deer, for example, or for target shooting, but the laws and regulations are strict and the punishments for non-compliance are pretty severe. And while this was largely a change that was welcomed, it has been met with some resistance at that time and even still to this day. It would also be unfair to pretend like these changes, as correct that some people may view them, also didn't totally eradicate the issues of gun violence in the country. Normally, we do finish these videos with like a balanced conclusion, but one that encourages you to watch and to consider all the arguments and evidence of every side of the issue and reach your own conclusion. In this case, the Dunblane Massacre, it marked a particularly dark day in history, not only of Scotland, but of the world as a whole, and the people who were affected still bear the painful memories to this day. The only hope is there's not something that will ever happen like this again. And it's also important at the very end here, I usually just jump in with my own thing. One of the big things you got to understand is, there's a lot of people in the United States that watch this channel, and there's, lesser Europeans that watch this channel. But I think kind of the big thing to understand is laws and regulations are based on what the people of that place want, right? So while laws over in Europe may seem really strict, and then laws in South America may not seem strict at all by United States standards, the reality is that's what the people living in those places typically want. So when it comes to the United States and kind of the things that happen here, obviously there's heinous stuff that happens over here. It's pretty bad. I'm not gonna lie to you. Now, does that mean you throw everything out? It's really up to the people, I guess, as a whole in this nation to kind of determine that, much like the people over in the UK determined that they wanted tighter regulations. So all I ask is that you keep the comments civil, whatever you comment out, whatever your opinion may be on the matter. Just remember there were people that were impacted, and this was a real event that real people ended up losing their lives. So anyways, I'm gonna wrap that up there. Not the topic, but I hope you enjoyed learning about something that has happened that you may have never heard about. If you did, please leave a like, leave a comment, or subscribe if you found that, this channel does provide some sort of informational status to you. Otherwise, I'm gonna thank my patrons real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Grayson West, Michigan Dogman, Monkey Man, and Scrungle. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness the Event tier, we have Beaver Malaga and Dragon Master Knight. And at the secondhand accounts tier, we have Bianca, Crippling Depression Gaming, Fred Rush, Stutz, and Troy. And the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support. It goes a long way towards helping out, so thank you. All right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed learning about something. I don't think it's really an enjoyable topic, but it's interesting to learn. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed learning something, and I will see y'all in the next one.